So the 4th of July, every year is celebrated. There's a lot of history there that's not being mentioned. There's people who celebrate it without caring to know the history. You even got not people, the so-called African Americans who celebrate it and they care not to look into the past. And it's just a reason to party. I'm not gonna focus on, you know, the whole slavery thing. I actually want to get into the real origins of the 4th of July, the story that's not being mentioned. But I can't help but think, what if some of our ancestors could see us that were slaves, how we celebrated the 4th of July, how would they probably look at us? You know what I mean? But like I said, it's not going to be the focus point. We're going to touch on a little bit of that, but let's get into the whole origins, the whole history, the dark truth that's not being mentioned. And then, and constantly, I'm going to ask throughout this presentation, is America really free? Check it out. So first, let's start with the official story. So we're going to go to this website, military.com. They're giving the official story, and it's the story you probably heard of in school. It's the story that everybody knows, but let's start there. The History of the 4th of July by military.com. On July 4th, 1776, the 13 colonies claimed their independence from Great Britain, an event that eventually led to the formation of the United States. Each year on the 4th of July, also known as Independence Day, U.S. citizens celebrate this historic event. Which country did we declare our independence from? The colonies, the populations of which were considered subject to the King of England, declared their independence from Britain Parliament, as well as King George III himself, according to History.com. What led the colonists to seek independence? The colonists were a melting pot of not only English, Irish, and Scottish, but also people from elsewhere in Europe and beyond. In many colonial communities, people spoke their native language, adhered to the customs of their countries of origin, and practiced their own faiths, although Catholicism was frowned upon, if not illegal, in the colonies. But the different groups had one thing in common. They all had to swear loyalty to the King of England and submit to the law as a British subject. Over time, more and more of colonists began to resent being under the thumb of Great Britain. This tension turned to outrage when British Parliament imposed the Stamp Act in 1765, putting a tax directly onto the colonists for the first time. Although the tax was a relatively small amount, the colonists were enraged that they had no say in it. For them, it was a matter of principle. And although the Stamp Act was repealed the following year, in its place, Parliament imposed the Declaratory Act, stating that Great Britain had complete power to legislate the colonies. The issue of taxation and representation raised by the Stamp Act strained relations with the colonies to the point that 10 years later, the colonists rose in armed rebellion against the British. Over the next few years, violent rebellion were common as more and more colonists demanded freedom and viewed the British Parliament as corrupt. These seeds of rebellion would eventually flower into the creation of the United States of America as a sovereign nation. The publication of Thomas Paine's stern pamphlet, Common Sense, in early 1776 lit a fire under the previously unthinkable idea. The movement for independence was now in full swing, according to the National Archives. How the Declaration of Independence was created. Open conflict between colonies and England was already a year old when the colonies convened at the Continental Congress in Philadelphia in the summer of 1776. During a June 7 session in the Pennsylvania State House, later Independence Hall, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia presented a resolution with the famous words, "Resolved, that these united colonies are, and of right out to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all alliance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is, and ought to be totally dissolved. These words were the impetus for the drafting of the formal Declaration of Independence. Although the resolution was not followed up on immediately, on June 11, consideration of the resolution was postponed by a vote of 7 colonies to 5, with the New York abstaining. However, the Committee of 5 was appointed to draft a statement presenting to the world the colonies' case for independence. Members of the committee included John Adams of Massachusetts, Roger Sherman of Connecticut, Benjamin Franklin of Pennsylvania, Robert R. Livingston of New York, and Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. The task of drafting the actual documents fell on Jefferson. On July 1, 1776, the Continental Congress reconvened, and on the following day, the Lee Resolution for Independence was adopted by 12 of 13 colonies, with New York not voting. What really happened on July 4, 1776? Discussions of Jefferson's Declaration of Independence resulted in minor changes, but the spirit of the document was unchanged. One of the main documents that informed Jefferson's wording of the Declaration of Independence was the Virginia Declaration of Rights. The Virginia document also ended up being the basis for the Bill of Rights. Revisions to the Declaration of Independence continued through July 3rd and into the late afternoon of July 4th, when it was officially adopted. Of the 13 colonies, 9 votes in the favor of the Declaration, 2, Pennsylvania and South Carolina, voted against it. Delaware was undecided and New York abstained. John Hancock, President of Continental Congress, signed the Declaration of Independence. It is said that he signed his name with a great flourish, so England King George can read without spectacles. Today, the original copy of the Declaration is housed in the National Archives in Washington, D.C. It is stored under the most modern archival conditions to preserve the delicate, precious document. The famous preamble of the Declaration of Independence reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by the Creator in certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness." So, why do we celebrate the 4th of July? July 4th has been designated a national holiday to commemorate the United States declaring itself to be free and independent nation. Although it was actually July 2nd, 1776, when the Second Continental Congress officially voted to declare independence from Great Britain, it wasn't until July 4th that the finalized Declaration of Independence was approved. It would be a few more weeks on August 2nd, 1776, until the most delegates were able to travel to Philadelphia to sign the document. 4th of July observance only became commonplace after the War of 1812. According to the Library of Congress, by 1870, the 4th of July was the most important secular holiday on the calendar. So some key things mentioned for that website. All men created equal. But remember, there were slaves back then. But it's all based on freeing themselves from Britain rule. They wanted to be away from the taxation of Britain. America wanted independence from Britain or any foreign country. They wanted to be established as themselves. So we're going to get into this. We're going to get into Britain because somebody's pulling the strings for Britain. So let's do a quick little history on Britain and how Britain got into the position Britain is in. And then we'll get to the War of 1812. And then we'll get to the other things that take place. Then you seriously ask yourself, is America free? In 1688, A&N Field, in his book, All These Things, published in 1931, explains the situation in England this year. As a result of Cromwell's decision to ignore the law banning the elite from entering to England, and all of them back in the defiance of the law, only 33 years earlier as follows. 33 years after the Cromwell had let the elite into Britain, a Dutch prince arrived from Amsterdam surrounded by a whole swarm of elites from the elitist financial century. Driving his royal father-in-law out of the kingdom, he graciously consented to ascend the throne of Britain. A very natural result following on this event was the inauguration of the national debt by the establishment 6 years later of the Bank of England for the purpose of lending money to the crown. Britain had paid her way as she went until the elite arrived. So pretty much what they're saying is Britain was on her way to being her own independent superpower. But she's dealing with the wrong crowds. And we're about to see how things are going to change for Britain. And it's all key when talking about America. Because remember, America is saying they're free from Britain. All right, let's continue. 1694, deceptively named Bank of England, is founded. It is deceptively named as it gives the impression it is controlled by the government of England, when in fact it is a private institution founded by the elite. In his book, The Breakdown of Money, published in 1934, Christopher Hollis explains the formation of the Bank of England as follows. In 1694, the government of William III, who had come from Holland with the elite, was in sore straits for money. A company of rich men under the leadership of one William Patterson offered to lend William $1,200,000 at 8% on the condition that the governor and the company of the Bank of England, as they called themselves, should have the right to issue notes to the full extent of its capital. That is to say, the bank got the right to collect $1,200,000 in gold and silver and turn it into $2,400,000. That is doubled, lending $1,200,000, the gold and the silver, to the government, and using the other estimated $1,200,000, the banknotes themselves. Patterson was quite right about it, that this privilege which had been given to the bank was a privilege to make money. In practice, they did not keep the cash reserve of nearly 200,000 or 300,000 pounds by 1696, i.e., within 2 years. We find them circulating an estimated 1,750,000 worth of notes against the cash reserve of 36,000. That is a backing of only 2% of what they issued and drew interest on. William Patterson states, the bank have benefits of interest on all monies which it creates out of nothing. In 1698, following the years of the Bank of England, the elite controlled the British money supply had come on leaps and bounds. They had flooded the country with so much money that the government debt to the bank had grown from its initial $1,250,000 to an estimated $16 million in only 4 years, an increase of 1,280%. Why do they do it? Simply, if the money in circulation in the country is an estimated 5 million and the central bank is set up to print another 15 million, stage one of the plan, and send that money out of the economy through loans, etc., then this will naturally reduce the value of the initial 5 million that was in circulation before the bank was formed. This is because the initial estimated 5 million that was 100% of the economy is now only 25% of the economy. It will also give the bank control of 75% of the money in the circulation within an estimated 15 million they sent out into the economy. This caused inflation, which is simply a reduction in the worth of money borne by the common person. Due to the economy being flooded with too much money, an economy which the central bank are responsible for, as the common person's money is worth less, he has to go to the bank to get a loan to help run his business, and when the central bank is satisfied there are enough people with the debt out there, they will tighten the supply of money by not offering loans. This is stage 2 of the plan. Stage 3 is sitting back and waiting for the people in debt to them to go bankrupt, allowing the bank to seize from them real wealth, business, and property, etc., for pennies on the pound. Inflation never affects a central bank. In fact, they are the only group who can benefit from it. As they are ever short of money, they can simply print more. Y'all see what's taking place here? They're controlling Britain. They're causing inflation. If you don't know what inflation, ever knew what inflation was, that's what it is. Tightening the money supply and releasing it and stuff like that. Yeah, they're playing their games. we're going to see that those games are still being played, even today. But right now we're focused on Britain. But you see that they control Britain and they're arrogant about it. Watch this. Back in 1815, this is the year Nathan Mayer Rothschild makes his famous statement. I care not what puppet is placed upon the throne of England to rule the empire on which the sun never sets. The man who controls Britain's money supply controls the British Empire, and I control the British money supply. You see, my man was arrogant about it, right? Yeah. Filthy rich and arrogant. So let's switch gears. We see that Britain is under the control of these elitists, these elites, right? Let's go over to America. So in the year 1790, Mayer Amschel Rothschild states, let me issue and control a nation's money, and I care not who writes the laws. So in the year 1791, the Rothschilds get control of a nation's money through Alexander Hamilton, their agent in George Washington's cabinet. When they set up the central bank in the United States called the First Bank of the United States, this is established with a 20-year charter. Within the first 5 years of the life of the central bank, the American government will borrow $8,200,000 from it, and prices in the country will increase by 72%. In relation to the excessive borrowing inflation, Thomas Jefferson, then Secretary of State, goes on to state, I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to our Constitution, taking from the federal government their power of borrowing. As you can see, and we'll see, it's all about that bank. It's all about that bank. So that is the first bank, centralized bank in America. And we're going to see how the War of 1812, you know what, the War of 1812, which was mentioned as far as when we read military.com, and they said the 4th of July has everything to do with that as well. We're going to see how that gets ushered in. Stay tuned. In the year 1811, the charter of the Rothschilds Bank of the United States runs out, and Congress votes against its renewal. Nathan Mayer Rothschild is not amused, and he states, either the application for renewal of the charter is granted, or the United States will find itself involved in the most disastrous war. However, the United States stands firm, and the charter is not renewed, which caused Nathan Mayer Rothschild to issue another threat in which he states, teach those impudent Americans a lesson and bring them back to colonial status. 1812. Backed by Rothschild's money and Nathan Mayer Rothschild's orders, the British declare war on the United States. The Rothschilds' plan is to cause the United States to build up such a debt and fight in this war that they have no option but to surrender to the British and allow the charter for the Rothschilds' own First Bank of the United States to be renewed. However, as the British are still fighting Napoleon, they are unable to mount much of an assault, and the war ends in 1814 with America undefeated. So how many people knew that? The War of 1812 was because the Rothschilds, they even threatened them. They sent Britain to them. The War of 1812. Remember, the redcoats are coming. The redcoats are coming. Britain was sent to America to fight because they did not renew the charter of the first central bank. I think it was called the Bank of the United States. The First Bank of the United States. America was, you seen the inflation that was taking place? You seen the inflation that was taking place in Britain? Britain just stuck with it. America started fighting like, y'all on some other stuff. We're not doing that. So America got rid of the bank, and the Rothschilds reacted. Well, that was the first bank. Let's keep going. It keeps getting deeper. It keeps getting deeper because I asked the question again. If the Declaration of Independence, the 4th of July, if that is based off of America fleeing, getting away from Britain rule or European powers rules. And we're starting to see that has everything to do with that bank. So it's freeing themselves from that bank, from inflation, from being taxed. Is America free today? Let's keep watching. So, in the year 1816, the American Congress passed a bill permitting yet another Rothschild-dominated central bank, which gave the Rothschilds control of the American money supply again. This is called the Second Bank of the United States and is given a 20-year charter. This, of course, means the end of the British war against America, with the death of thousands of British and American soldiers and the formation of another Rothschild-owned central bank. I'll get a round of applause for that. So the War of 1812 was to stop the oppression of Britain or Rothschilds, and you did away with the bank. And the only reason why they sent Britain to you to fight is because you did away with the bank. But then a couple years later, in 1816, the bank is back. I had to give a round of applause for that. Now that was strike one, right? You had the bank, realized there was something wrong with it. You got rid of it. Okay. Then there's the second bank. You allow it back in after you fought a war to prevent it. Come on now. Is America free? Oh, yeah. Come on. If y'all paying attention, y'all are connecting the dots right now. Y'all are connecting the dots. Let's keep going, though. In the year 1828, after 12 years during which the Second Bank of the United States ruthlessly manipulated the American economy to detriment of the people, but to the benefit of their own money-grabbing ends, the American people had enough, and opponents of this bank nominated Senator Andrew Jackson of Tennessee to run for president. To the dismay of the Rothschilds, Jackson wins the presidency and makes it quite clear he's going to use his mandate to kill this bank at his first opportunity. He starts out during his first term in office rooting out the bank's many minions from government services. To illustrate how deep this cancer was rooted in the government, in order to achieve this end, he had to fire 2,000 of the 11,000 employees of the federal government. Yeah, I don't do politics. I just don't. I feel like it don't matter what side you vote for. The agenda that's supposed to happen will happen. But back in Andrew's day, Andrew Jackson, he actually fought for his people, his American people. He's not given the credit. Like, people, you ask people who's your favorite presidents, and they might name. You very rarely hear Jackson mentioned. Now, I don't have a favorite president. When I was in the world, yeah, me. Now, because I understand. And just understand. But Andrew Jackson is somebody not to be slept on. And let's dig into what Andrew Jackson did. In 1832, the Second Bank of the United States asked Congress to pass a renewal of the bank's charter 4 years early. Congress complies and sends the bill to President Jackson, the seventh president of the United States, serving from 1829 to 1837. For signing. President Jackson vetoes this bill, and in his veto message he states the following: "It is not our own citizens only who are to receive the bounty of the government. More than 8 millions of the stock of the bank are held by foreigners. Is there no danger to our liberty and independence in a bank that in its nature has so little to bind it to our country? Controlling our currency, receiving our public monies, and holding thousands of our citizens' independence would be more formidable and dangerous than the military power of the enemy If government would confine itself to equal protection, and as heaven does its rain shower the favor alike on high and on the low, the rich and the poor, it would be an unqualified blessing. In the act before me, there seems to be wide and unnecessary departure from these just principles. In July, Congress is unable to override President Jackson's veto. President Jackson then stands for re-election. For the first time in American history, he takes his argument directly to the people by taking his re-election campaign on the road. His campaign slogan is Jackson and no bank. Even though the Rothschilds poured over $3 million into the campaign of President Jackson's opponent, the Republican Senator Henry Clay, President Jackson is re-elected by a landslide in November. However, President Jackson knows the battle is only beginning, and following his victory, he states, "The hydra of corruption is only scorched, not dead." 1833. President Jackson starts removing the government deposits from the Rothschilds' controlled Second Bank of the United States, and instead deposit them into banks directed by independent bankers. This causes the Rothschilds to panic, and so they do what they do best by contracting the money supply and causing depression. President Jackson knows what they're up to and later states, "You are a den of thieves and vipers, and I intend to root you out. By the eternal God, I will root you out." 1835, on January 30th, an assassin tries to shoot President Jackson, but miraculously, both of the assassin's pistols misfire. President Jackson later claims that he knew the Rothschilds were responsible for that attempted assassination. He is not the only one. Indeed, even the assassin, Richard Lawrence, who was found not guilty by reason of insanity, later brags that powerful people in Europe had hired him and promised to protect him if he were caught. 1836. Following his years of fighting against the Rothschilds and their central bank in America, President Jackson finally succeeds in throwing the Rothschild central bank out of America when the bank charter is not renewed. It would not be until 1913 that the Rothschilds would be able to set up their third central bank in America, the Federal Reserve. In 1838, on January 8th, President Jackson pays off the final installment of the national debt, which had been created by allowing the banks to issue currency for government bonds. Rather than simply issuing treasury notes without such debt, he becomes the only president to ever pay off the debt. That first time of sarcasm. That applause right there is because my whole time in existence, living, America's always been in debt. There was a president that actually paid off the debt. Andrew Jackson. Google it. Just saying. Let's keep digging. Let's definitely keep digging. Because if you follow along, this is getting quite interesting. Check these out. All this. What we're about to read next. Andrew Jackson killed the bank. Andrew Jackson killed the bank. You see this? Google it. Look, I Googled it. Andrew Jackson, I killed the bank. It's a famous quote. I'm showing y'all this for a reason. I'm definitely showing y'all this for a reason. He wanted to be known for killing the bank. In 1845, Andrew Jackson, the 7th President of the United States, dies. He leaves instructions for the following inscription to be placed upon his tombstone, in accordance with what he regarded his greatest service to humanity. The inscription is, "I killed the bank." This is done and is, of course, in reference to the fact that he destroyed the Rothschild's Second Bank of the United States in 1836. In 1841, President John Tyler, the 10th President of the United States from 1841 to 1845, vetoes the act to renew the charter of the Bank of the United States, which Rothschild agents had been tooting around Congress. He goes on to receive hundreds of letters threatening him with assassination. So I gotta ask it, why do presidents get assassinated? You ever think about that? Like, why do presidents get assassinated? So we see John Tyler. He said something about these banks, and he was threatened. All he did was continue on what the president before him was doing. Andrews. I'm just saying. That's just, it makes you think. Like, okay, presidents get assassinated. Why? Mm-hmm. If you're not picking up on it yet, there is powers in the European countries that is not to be messed with. And it's the same powers that America is claiming independence from, but she's not really free. Just saying, man. Let's keep going. 1860. In the American South, since America's independence, a close business relationship had developed between the cotton growing aristocracy and the cotton manufacturers in England. The cotton was even delivered from America to France and Britain on Rothschild-owned ships. The Rothschilds decided that this was America's Achilles heel that they should exploit to establish themselves in America. Following the destruction of their central bank by President Andrew Jackson in 1836, the Rothschild had prepared long for this, and this year the southern states of America contained a vast number of Rothschild agents. They carefully manipulated the population by conspiring with local politicians they had in their pocket and spreading propaganda amongst the people. This resulted in secession of South Carolina on December 29, 1860. Only a few weeks later, another 6 states would join the conspiracy against the Union and form a breakaway nation called the Confederate States of America, with Jefferson Davis as its president. In order to provoke the North, these Rothschild agents and their brainwashed followers raid armies, seize forts, arsenals, mints, and other Union property. Even members of President Buchanan's cabinet conspired to destroy the Union by damaging the public credit and working to bankrupt the nation. Buchanan claims to deplore secession, but takes no step to check it. Even when a United States ship is fired upon by South Carolina shore batteries, 1861. 1 month after his inauguration, President Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States from 1860 until his assassination in 1865. The American Civil War gets underway at Fort Sumner, South Carolina, after the South Carolina leaves the Union. Slavery has always been cited as the cause of this war, but this was simply not the case, as President Lincoln himself states. I have no purpose directly or indirectly to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it now exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. My paramount objective is to save the Union, and it is not neither to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. The real reason for the war is that the southern states were in dire economic situation due to the actions of the northern states. Northern industrialists had used trade tariffs to prevent the southern states from buying cheaper European goods. Europe subsequently retaliated by stopping cotton imports from the South. Thus, the South has been forced to pay more for goods while having their income slashed. This is when the money changers saw the opportunity to divide and conquer America by plunging it into civil war. This is confirmed by Otto von Bismarck when he was Chancellor of Germany in 1871 to 1890, who states the following in 1876. The division of the United States into federations of equal force was decided long before the Civil War by the high financial powers of Europe. These bankers were afraid that the United States, if they remained as one bloc and as one nation, would attain economic and financial independence, which would upset their financial dominion over the world. The voice of the Rothschilds predominated. They foresaw the tremendous booty if they could substitute two feeble democracies indebted to the financiers for the vigorous republic. Confident and self-providing, therefore they stated their emissaries in order to exploit the question of slavery and thus dig an abyss between two parts of the republic. Indeed, only months after the first shots in South Carolina, The Rothschilds loaned the Napoleon of the Battle of Waterloo's nephew 210 million francs to seize Mexico and then station troops along the southern border of the United States, taking advantage of the American Civil War to return Mexico to a colonial rule. This was in violation of the Monroe Doctrine, which was issued by President James Monroe during his 7th annual State of the Union address to Congress in 1823. This doctrine proclaimed the United States' opinion that Europe powers would no longer colonize the Americas or interfere with the affairs of sovereign nations located in the Americas, such as the United States, Mexico, and others. In return, the United States planned to stay neutral in wars between European powers and in wars between a European power and its colonies. However, if these later types of wars were to occur in the Americas, the United States would view such actions as hostile toward itself. While the French were breaching the Monroe Doctrine in Mexico, the British followed suit by moving 11,000 troops into Canada and positioning them along America's northern border. President Lincoln knew he was in trouble, so he went with his secretary to the Treasury, Salmon P. Chase, to New York to apply for loans necessary to fund America's defense. The Rothschilds had engineered the war to make the Union fail and were not about to save it now, so they instructed their American banks to offer loans at 24% to 36% interest. President Lincoln declined this, as they knew he would, and returned to Washington, where he sent for Colonel Dick Taylor of Chicago, who he put in charge of the problem of how he should finance the war. During one meeting, President Lincoln asked Colonel Taylor what proposal he had come up with to finance the war. Colonel Taylor states, "Why, Lincoln, that is easy. Just get Congress to pass a bill authorizing the printing of full legal tender treasury notes and pay your soldiers with them and go ahead and win your war with them also." President Lincoln asked Colonel Taylor if the people of the United States would accept the notes, to which Colonel Taylor replied, "The people, or anyone else, will not have any choice in the matter if you make them full legal tender. They will have the full sanctions of the government and be just as good as money, as Congress is given that express right by the Constitution." 1862. President Lincoln begins printing off $450 million worth of American currency. These bills are printed in green ink on the reverse side in order to distinguish them from other bills in circulation and are called greenbacks. These are printed at no interest to the federal government and are used to pay the troops to purchase their supplies. President Lincoln would be the last president to issue debt-free United States notes. And on this subject, he states, "The government should create, issue, and circulate all currency and credit needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of the consumers. The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only supreme prerogative of the government, but it is the government's greatest creative opportunity. By the adoption of these principles, the taxpayers will be saved immense sums of interest. Money will cease to be master and become a servant of humanity." He also states, "We gave the people of the Republic the greatest blessing they ever had, their own paper money to pay their own debts." The same year, the Times of London illustrated who's pulling the strings when it publishes a story containing the following statement: "If that mischievous financial policy, which had its origins in North America Republic, should become indurated down to a fixture, then the government will furnish its own money without cost. It will pay off debts and be without debt. It will have all the money necessary to carry on its commerce. It will become prosperous beyond precedent in the history of civil governments of the world. The brains and the wealth of all countries will go to North America. The government must be destroyed or it will destroy every monarchy on the globe." A Hazard circular from Rothschild's controlled Bank of England comes to light some years later that provides further information as to why Lincoln's debt-free money and greenback had to be stopped. Slavery is likely to be abolished by the war, power, and chattel slavery destroyed. This I and my elitist European friends are glad of, for slavery is but the owning of labor and carries with it the care of the laborers. while the European plan led by England is that capital shall control labor by controlling wages. This can be done by controlling the money. The great debt that capitalists will see to it is made out of the war must be used as a means to control the volume of money. To accomplish this, the bonds must be used as banking bases. We are now waiting for the Secretary of Treasury to make his recommendation to Congress. It will not do to allow the greenback, as it is called, to circulate as money any length of time, as we cannot control that. 1864, President Lincoln is reelected on November 8th, and on November 21st, he writes a friend the following: "The money power prey upon the nation in times of peace and conspires against it in times of adversity. It is more despotic than monarchy, more insolent than, more selfish than bureaucracy." In 1865, in a statement to Congress, President Abraham Lincoln states, "I have two great enemies, the Southern Army in front of me and a financial institution in the rear. Of the two, the one in my rear is my greatest foe." On April 14th, 41 days after his second inauguration, and just 5 days after General Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox, President Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth at the Ford Theater. He would later die of his injuries less than 2 months before the end of the Civil War. More than 70 years later, Booth's granddaughter, Izola Forrester, reveals in her book on Booth this one mad act that he had been put up to this assassination by powerful interests in Europe, and contrary to reports that Booth was later killed by American authorities, he actually escaped to Europe and died in Calais at the age of 39. Subsequently, allegations that international bankers were responsible for President Lincoln's assassination will be made in the Canadian House of Commons nearly 70 years later, in 1934. The person who revealed this was a Canadian attorney, Gerald G. McGuire. He obtained evidence deleted from the public record provided to him by Secret Service agents at the trial of John Wilkes Booth. After Booth's alleged death, McGuire stated that it showed that John Wilkes Booth was a mercenary worker for the international bankers. His speech would be reported in an article in the Vancouver Sun dated 2nd of May 1934, which he states, "Abraham Lincoln, the murdered emancipator of the slaves, was assassinated through the machinations of a group of representatives of the international bankers who feared the United States President's national credit ambitions. There was only one group in the world at the time who had any reason to desire the death of Lincoln. They were the men opposed to his national currency program and who have fought him throughout the whole Civil War on his policies of the greenback currency." Gerald G. McGuire also stated that Lincoln's assassination was not purely because international bankers wanted to reestablish a central bank in America, but also because they wanted to base America's currency on gold, which they of course controlled. They wanted to put America on the gold standard. This was a direct opposition of President Lincoln's policy of issuing greenbacks, based solely on the good faith of the credit of the United States. The Vancouver Sun article also quoted Gerald G. McGuire with the following statement: "They were the men of interest in the establishment of the gold standard and the right of the bankers to manage currency and credit of every nation in the world. With Lincoln out of the way, they were able to proceed with their plan and did proceed with it in the United States. Within 8 years after Lincoln's assassination, silver was demonetized and the gold standard system was set up in the United States." You knew that about Lincoln? How many people knew that about Lincoln? Lincoln said some key things. He wanted to save the South, but his intentions was not to free the slaves. Yeah, we got Juneteenth because through Lincoln's actions, it led to, the slaves being free. But you see, that wasn't his goal. I'm not even going to look a gift horse in the mouth. You know what I'm saying? I look at it like this. I'm thankful we're free to a point. I know when I say free, I'm saying we're free to a point because even though they took the shackles off us, it's still in our minds, a lot of us. But what I'm saying is I'm thankful that I wasn't raised on a plantation. like my ancestors did. I'm thankful for that. But that's just something people need to know. Like I've spoken to people and they're like, nah, Abraham freed the slaves, and he wanted to free the slaves because it wasn't right. Abraham did not want to free the slaves, man. But that's neither here nor there. One thing I can say, just like Andrew Jackson, Abraham did something which would make him an American hero, so to speak. Issuing the greenbacks. That statement he made, where he said that a nation should issue its own money. A lot of people think that America issues its own money. It doesn't. The Federal Reserve issues money to America. Okay. People say the Federal Reserve. All right, it's the federal government. We're going to find out. It's nothing federal about the Federal Reserve. It's them same people and them same banks. So I ask again, is America free? I really think about what I'm saying here. I really think about it. Anyway, back to what I was saying. So Abraham, he ended up, what was interesting was he ended up fighting the South because the elite sent people into the country to stir up something which would take away from slavery. See, a lot of things people don't know about slavery was during the time of slavery, America was thriving, especially the South. Especially the South. So I scratch my head every now and then when Trump used to say, let's make America great again. What grade you talking about? You're talking about when America had slaves, huh? But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But what I'm saying to you is, America was thriving. Mississippi alone was booming on a level where it could have had its own economy. The Rothschilds capitalized by making the North and the South go at it through trade tariffs and stuff like that. They smart. They while everybody else is playing checkers, they're playing chess. So it led to a war, which we know is the Civil War. But how many, be honest with yourself, how many here that's listening to this, knew that the Civil War technically was officially started because the Rothschilds seen it as an opportunity to move their central bank in? What we're told in schools, what we're told, period, is to stop slavery. You heard it out of President Lincoln's mouth, his own mouth. You can Google his quote. I actually started to put his quote up there through Google. But I said, you know what? Nah, just keep it going because it's long enough. But what I'm saying to you is this, family. It all went back to the bank. And the bank has everything to do with the so-called independence of America. This is the ugly history. This is the ugly history. Let's continue on. We got a little bit more to go, but let's continue on. 1881, President James A. Garfield, the 20th President of the United States, who lasted only 100 days, states 2 weeks before his assassination, "Whoever controls the volume of money in our country is absolute master of all industry and commerce. And when you realize that the entire system is very easily controlled one way or another by a few powerful men at the top, you will not have to be told how periods of inflation and depression originates." 1907, Rothschild's Jacob Schiff, the head of the Kuhn, Loeb and Co., in a speech to New York Chamber of Commerce, warns that unless we have a central bank with an adequate control of credit resources, this country is going to undergo the most severe and far-reaching money panic in its history. Suddenly, America finds itself in the middle of another financial crisis, known as the Panic of 1907, which goes on to decimate the lives of millions of Americans. In 1909, Jacob Schiff founds the National Advancement of the Association for Colored People, the NAACP. This is done to incite black people into rioting, looting, and other forms of disorder, in order to cause a rift between the black and the white communities. 1913, March 4th, Woodrow Wilson is elected the 28th President of the United States. Shortly after he is inaugurated, he is visited in the White House by Ashkenazi elitist Samuel Utmeyer of the law firm of Guggenheim and Utmeyer and Marshall, who tries to blackmail him for the sum of $40,000 in relation to an affair Wilson had while he was a professor at Princeton University with a fellow professor's wife. President Wilson does not have the money, so Utmeyer volunteers to pay the $40,000 out of his pocket to the woman Wilson had an affair with, on the condition that Wilson promised to appoint to the first vacancy of the United States Supreme Court a nominee to be recommended by President Wilson by Utmeyer. Wilson agrees to this. Strangely enough, the same year that they do this, the elite also set up their last and current central bank of America, the Federal Reserve. In order to get support for this from the public, they brazenly states that the central bank could curb inflation and depression, when in fact the very idea of the central bank is to manipulate the money supply and cause this. Following and passing the Federal Reserve Act on December 23rd, Congressman Charles Lindbergh stated, the act establishes the most gigantic trust on the earth. When the president signs this bill, the invisible government of the monetary power will be legalized. The greatest crime of the ages is perpetuated by the banking and the currency bill. It is important to note that the Federal Reserve is a private company. It is neither federal nor does it have any reserve. It is conservatively estimated that profits exceed $150 billion per year. Yet the Federal Reserve has never once in history published accounts. Some recent evidence has come forward as to who really owns the Federal Reserve, and they are as following. So that's how you got the 4th of July, family. That's how you got the Federal Reserve. That's how you got every central bank that has been brought in here. You've been following history, what has been presented. You see that the so-called heroes of this country fought against that bank. Independence was based on that bank not being here. That bank is here, family. Remember in the beginning when Britain started putting like a little petty tax on things? People started getting upset about that. That's when they was like, nope. Okay. Today you pay what we call an income tax. You pay state, federal tax. You pay tax. You don't know where your dollars is going to. When you do some homework and some research, your dollars is going overseas. It affects the country all the way to you individually. Now, I'm not telling you to go out here and not pay your taxes. I'm not saying that. Because, we who know this word, render unto Caesar what's due unto Caesar. I mean, this is just the way it's set up. So we know we got to pay it. It's no buck in the system. There's no way getting around it. I'm just stuck on why y'all celebrating freedom and you're not free. And I'm even more stuck. See, that was to America. Dear America. That was to America. I'm even more stuck at my people who, they go all out. We just look for a reason to party. I ain't knocking you. Go ahead, do your thing. Who am I to knock you? But I imagine your creator is not pleased. Let me just say that. But this is just putting information out. This is the dark history of the 4th of July. I pray it was a blessing. Here, No Cap TV. It's no cap, going right to the truth. It's what we promote. So, hey, till next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.